My name's Abigail, and I'm 29. I'm sitting at my aunt's polished dining table, the annual family meeting buzzing around me. Clinking glasses and forced laughs fill the air. But I catch my cousin's whispers about my so-called struggles. My heart sinks when Ethan smirks, calling me the poor one in front of everyone. Their laughter stings, echoing over my father's empty chair. I could shrink, but something sparks inside me. My secret's about to change everything. Have you ever been judged unfairly? Like, and subscribe to hear how I turned the tables. Ethan's smirk from the family meeting still burned in my mind, his words slicing deeper than I'd let on. 2 years ago, I was in a different place, holed up in my tiny apartment, the kind with peeling paint and a faucet that dripped no matter how much I tightened it. I was 27, then scraping by as a freelance graphic designer, my desk buried under a mess of unpaid bills and takeout containers. The weight of it all pressed on my chest, but I kept going, fueled by stubbornness and a promise I'd made to my father before he passed. His old letters were scattered across my bed that night, each one a piece of him I clung to. I picked one up, the paper worn soft from years of rereading. In his slanted handwriting, he'd written, "Prove them wrong, Abby." Those words were my lifeline, especially when the world seemed hell-bent on proving them right. My phone buzzed, snapping me out of it. Clara's name flashed on the screen, and I hesitated before answering. My older sister had a way of making me feel small without even trying. "Hey," she said, her voice all business. "The family meeting's coming up. You're coming, right?" I mumbled a yes, but before I could say more, she added, "Oh, and Abby, try to dress a little better this time. You know how Aunt Margaret is." The line went quiet for a second, and I could picture her manicured nails tapping impatiently. "It's just we all want you to make a good impression." I swallowed hard, muttering something about being busy before hanging up. Her words weren't cruel, not exactly, but they landed like a punch. Clara was the golden child, always polished, always approved of. Me, I was the one who showed up in thrift store jeans, the one they whispered about when they thought I wasn't listening. I shoved the phone away and grabbed my sketchbook, needing to clear my head. The apartment was too small to pace, so I headed to the coffee shop down the street, a place called Brew and Bean, where I could blend into the background. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped in, the smell of roasted coffee wrapping around me like a hug. I settled into a corner booth, my sketchbook open to a blank page. I wasn't drawing anything specific, just letting my pencil move, tracing the outline of a building I'd been dreaming about. It was a silly habit, sketching structures I'd never build, but it kept me sane. That's when I heard Ethan's voice, loud and smug, from a table nearby. He was with a couple of guys I didn't recognize, his real estate agent badge glinting on his blazer. "She's still doing that freelance thing," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Abigail, I mean, my cousin. Can you believe it, hustling for pennies while I'm closing million-dollar deals?" The guys laughed, and my stomach twisted. I sank lower in my seat, praying he wouldn't see me. He didn't, but he kept going. Always thought she'd crash and burn by now. Her dad was the same way, big dreams, no follow-through. My pencil froze mid-stroke. He was talking about my father, the man who'd worked himself to the bone for us, who'd believed in me when no one else did. Ethan's words weren't just about me. They were a cheap shot at everything my father stood for. The coffee shop felt smaller, the air thicker, and I wanted to disappear. A barista, a woman with braids and a name tag reading Maya, walked over with a fresh coffee I hadn't ordered. On the house, she whispered, sliding it across the table. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan's table, and she slipped a napkin under the mug. Scrawled in blue ink were the words, "Don't let them dim your light." I looked up, and she gave me a small nod before heading back to the counter. That napkin, that gesture, it was the first kindness I'd felt in weeks. I tucked it into my pocket, my fingers brushing the building sketch I'd drawn. Ethan's laughter rang out again, and I gripped my pencil tighter. I wasn't just angry. I was awake. His words, Clara's jab, they were fuel now. I didn't know how, but I was going to make them eat their doubts. I left Brew and Bean with Maya's napkin tucked in my pocket, Ethan's laughter still ringing in my ears. The evening air was crisp, biting at my cheeks as I walked home, my sketchbook clutched tight. My apartment greeted me with its usual chaos, a flickering light bulb, a stack of overdue notices on the counter. I ignored them and sank onto my couch, the springs creaking under my weight. My phone lit up again, this time with a text from Clara. "Just checking you're set for the meeting. Don't forget what I said about dressing up." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to snap back to tell her I wasn't her project to fix, but I didn't. I set the phone down and reached for my father's letters again, needing his voice to drown out hers. I opened a different letter this time, one I hadn't read in months. It was shorter, written when he was sick, his handwriting shakier. "Abigail," it said, "you're stronger than their words. Don't let them make you small." I traced the letters, my eyes stinging. He'd written it after a family dinner where Aunt Margaret had made a snide comment about my artsy career path, implying I'd never amount to much. Clara had just smiled and changed the subject like always. That memory twisted something in me, a mix of grief and defiance. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for him. For every time they'd dismissed us both. The next morning, I dragged myself to a thrift store, determined to find something for the family meeting that wouldn't give Clara or Margaret ammunition. The racks were stuffed with faded dresses and mismatched blazers, the air heavy with mothballs. I found a navy skirt and a cream blouse, nothing fancy, but clean and sharp. As I paid the cashier, a woman with tired eyes said, "You look like you're gearing up for a battle." I laughed, but it wasn't far off. I felt like I was armoring up, not just for their judgment, but for the weight of proving I belonged. Back home, I tried on the outfit standing in front of my cracked mirror. The blouse fit well, but I didn't feel like me. I felt like a version of myself trying to please them, and it made my stomach churn. I sat on my bed, the skirt still on, and opened my laptop. I'd been researching real estate on the side, a secret I hadn't shared with anyone. It started as a whim, a way to channel my sketches into something tangible. I'd found a course online, cheap but thorough, and spent nights studying zoning laws and property values. My latest obsession was an apartment building downtown, a rundown place with potential. I'd even emailed the owner asking questions about the sale price. It was a long shot, but it was mine. That evening, I headed back to Brew and Bean, needing a break from my own head. The place was quieter, the after-work crowd thinning out. Maya was behind the counter, wiping it down with a rag. She spotted me and grinned. "Back for more free coffee," she teased. I shook my head, ordering a latte and settling at my usual booth. I pulled out my laptop, diving into my real estate notes, but my mind kept drifting to Ethan's words at the coffee shop. Crash and burn. I clenched my jaw, typing faster, as if I could outrun his voice. Maya slid into the booth across from me during her break, her apron still on. "What's got you so focused?" she asked, nodding at my screen. I hesitated, then turned the laptop toward her, showing a photo of the apartment building. "It's just a dream," I said, "but I'm figuring out how to buy it." Her eyes widened, and she leaned closer. "That's no small dream," she said. "My brother's in real estate. Want me to ask him for tips?" I nodded, surprised by her offer. We talked for a while, her warmth loosening the knot in my chest. But as I left, my phone buzzed with another text from Clara. "Aunt Margaret's asking if you're bringing anything to the meeting. Maybe just stick to showing up." The words hit like a slap, her assumption that I had nothing to offer. I shoved my phone in my pocket, my resolve hardening. They thought they knew me, but they were about to learn how wrong they were.
Whoa.
Clara's last text about sticking to showing up festered in my mind as I stepped into Aunt Margaret's house for the family meeting. The dining room was a showcase of excess crystal chandelier mahogany table and a spread of catered food that screamed money. I adjusted my thrift store blouse, feeling like an imposter among the tailored suits and designer dresses. My cousins mingled their voices a hum of self-congratulation, while I hovered near the edge, clutching a glass of water to steady my hands. Ethan's coffee shop jab still stung, but I told myself I'd keep my head down, just get through it. Aunt Margaret caught my eye from across the room, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She glided over her perfume sharp and overpowering. "Abigail," she said, her voice syrupy. "It's so good you made it. I was just telling everyone about my new place in the Hamptons. You should visit sometime if you can manage the trip." Her words were a velvet glove over a fist, and I felt the familiar heat of shame creep up my neck. I forced a nod, muttering something about being busy, but her gaze lingered pitying, like I was a stray she'd taken in. Before I could retreat, Clara swept in her heels, clicking on the hardwood. She looked flawless, her silk dress catching the light, and for a moment, I saw the sister I used to idolize. But then she spoke. "I got that promotion I was after," she announced loud enough for the room to hear. "Director of Marketing. It's been a long road, but hard work pays off." She glanced at me, her smile tight. "Not like freelancing, right? Abby, you're still doing that, aren't you?" The room quieted, eyes turning to me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. My throat tightened, but I managed a weak, "Yeah, still at it." Clara's laugh was light, but it cut deep, reminding me of every time she'd outshined me to make herself look better. I found a seat at the far end of the table, my fingers tracing the edge of my father's old keychain in my pocket. The tiny house charm warm against my skin. It was my anchor, a reminder of who I was fighting for. The conversation shifted to investments, and Ethan took center stage, his voice booming with confidence. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing with a glass of wine. "I've got a deal lined up," he said. "A condo project downtown. Prime location, 6 figures minimum. We should pool family money, make it a legacy thing." Aunt Margaret clapped her hands, delighted, and others nodded, caught up in his pitch. I listened, my mind racing. I knew that area my secret building was just blocks away. I raised my hand, tentative, wanting to add something about the market trends I'd studied. Maybe we could look at multifamily units too. I started, my voice quieter than I meant. They're more stable long-term. Ethan didn't even look at me. He just chuckled, cutting me off. "That's cute, Abigail, but let's leave the big ideas to the professionals." "Okay." The table erupted in laughter, and my face burned. Clara didn't laugh, but she didn't defend me either. She just sipped her wine, her eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Aunt Margaret leaned over, patting my hand like I was a child. "Don't worry, dear," she said. "Not everyone's cut out for this kind of thing." The room spun, their voices blending into a dull roar. I wanted to scream, to tell them I'd been studying real estate for years, that I wasn't the failure they painted me as. But my words stayed locked in my throat, choked by years of their dismissal. I glanced at Uncle Harold seated across from me, his face unreadable, but his eyes sharp, watching me like he saw something no one else did. It was the only thing keeping me from bolting. Ethan's voice rose again, detailing his condo plan, and I felt the walls closing in, my anger and hurt swelling with every word. Ethan's condo pitch droned on his confidence, filling the room like smoke, choking me. I sat frozen, my fingers still gripping the house charm in my pocket, its edges digging into my palm. The laughter from his cute jab lingered, a fresh bruise on top of old wounds. I scanned the table, hoping for an ally, but Clara was engrossed in her phone, her face blank, as if my humiliation was just background noise. Aunt Margaret whispered to a cousin, her eyes flicking toward me, and I knew they were dissecting my failure again. My chest tightened, each breath a struggle against the weight of their judgment. Ethan passed around glossy brochures, the kind with sleek renderings of glass towers. "This is the future," he said, tossing one in my direction like an afterthought. I caught it, the paper slick under my fingers, and stared at the bolded price tags. 6 figures, just like he'd bragged. My cousins murmured excitedly, tossing around words like equity and ROI, while I sat silent, my own dreams burning a hole in my mind. I'd spent months researching that downtown market, poring over listings and tax records, but here my voice was less than nothing. The brochure trembled in my hands, not from nerves, but from a rage I could barely contain. Aunt Margaret chimed in, her voice bright with pride. "Ethan, this is brilliant! Your father would be so proud!" She turned to the table, her gaze sweeping past me. "It's important we keep the family name strong, don't you think?" Everyone nodded, and I felt the sting of being erased, as if I wasn't even part of this legacy she was so obsessed with. My father's name. Our name was on those letters I read every night, but to her it was just a footnote. I wanted to speak, to tell them I'd been working on something bigger than their shiny condos, but my throat felt sealed shut, their dismissal a lock I couldn't pick. Clara finally looked up, setting her phone down with a soft clink. She cleared her throat, drawing eyes. "I think Ethan's onto something," she said, her tone measured. "We should all chip in. It's a chance to build something lasting." She glanced at me, and for a split second, I thought she'd include me. But then she added, "Well, most of us anyway. Abigail's got enough on her plate with her projects." The word dripped with condescension, and a few cousins snickered. My face burned, not just from her words, but from the betrayal. Clara knew how hard I worked, how I'd clawed my way through lean months. She'd seen my apartment, my late-night emails, but here she was, painting me as the family flake. I opened my mouth, desperate to defend myself, but Ethan cut in, his voice sharp. "Let's stay focused," he said, waving a hand like I was a distraction. "Abigail, maybe you can pitch in with some design work. You know, flyers or something?" His smirk was back, and the table chuckled again, the sound like nails on a chalkboard. My vision blurred, not with tears, but with a fury that made my hands shake. I wanted to flip the table, to scream that I wasn't their punchline, that I'd done more than they could imagine. But I didn't. I sat there, my silence, a cage I couldn't break. Uncle Harold's gaze met mine again, his expression softer now, almost pained. He leaned forward slightly, as if he wanted to speak, but Aunt Margaret's voice drowned him out. "We'll need to move fast," she said, already planning. "Ethan, you're in charge. The rest of us will follow your lead." The words were a final blow, a declaration that I didn't belong in their world. My heart pounded, each beat a mix of anger and grief, as I realized how deeply they'd written me off. The room closed in their voices, a suffocating hum, and I knew something inside me was about to break. "Sunny?" The hum of the dining room grew unbearable. Ethan's voice slicing through me as he waved another brochure, his condo plan the center of everyone's world. I sat rigid, my fingers numb around my father's keychain, their laughter, and Clara's betrayal a storm in my chest. My pulse thundered, drowning out their chatter. I couldn't take another second of being invisible. My hand moved before my brain caught up, reaching into my bag under the table. The leather folder inside was heavy, its contents, my secret armor, the one thing I'd held back for years. Ethan was mid-sentence, boasting about his investor contacts, when I stood my chair, scraping loud against the hardwood. The room stilled, heads turning their eyes, pinning me like a spotlight. My throat was dry, but my voice came out steady, sharper than I expected. "I have something to say," I said, my words cutting through the air. Ethan raised an eyebrow, smirking, clearly expecting another cute idea. Clara looked up, her face a mix of curiosity and unease. Aunt Margaret tilted her head, her smile patronizing, as if humoring me. Only Uncle Harold leaned forward, his gaze intense, like he sensed what was coming. I pulled the folder from my bag, my hands trembling but deliberate, and set it on the table with a soft thud. "It's not about your condos, Ethan," I said, my eyes locked on his. "It's about something real. Something I've been working on." His smirk faltered just for a second, and I felt a surge of power, raw and unfamiliar. I flipped open the folder, revealing the real estate contract I'd spent months securing. The pages were crisp, the black ink stark against the white, detailing my ownership of the apartment building downtown, the one they all lived in, the one they thought was just another landlord's property. The table went quiet, the kind of silence that sucks the air out of a room. I didn't look at Clara or Margaret. I kept my focus on Ethan, watching his confidence crack. "This," I said, sliding the contract toward the center of the table, "is the deed to the building you're all renting from. I own it. Every unit. Every lease." My voice shook, not from fear, but from the weight of finally saying it out loud. I'd bought it piece by piece, scraping together loans and savings, working nights while they mocked my projects. It was my triumph, my proof, and now it was theirs to choke on. Ethan laughed, a short, nervous bark, as if I'd told a bad joke. "You," he said, his voice loud in the hush. "Come on, Abigail, don't embarrass yourself. That's not how this works." He reached for the contract, flipping through it like he could disprove it with a glance. His face changed as he read, the smirk gone, replaced by something I'd never seen on him: uncertainty. I stood taller, my heart hammering, feeding off his doubt. "I've been your landlord for 6 months," I said, my words slow and deliberate. "Every rent check you've paid, it's been to me." Clara's glass slipped from her hand, hitting the table with a clink, wine splashing across the cloth. Her eyes were wide, her mouth open, but no words came out. Aunt Margaret's hand flew to her chest, her rings glinting as she gasped. "You're lying," she said, her voice shrill, almost accusing. "That's impossible. You couldn't afford—" She trailed off, her eyes darting to the contract, then back to me, as if seeing me for the first time. The room buzzed with whispers, cousins leaning toward each other, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. I felt their stares, heavy and probing, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. The dining room was a pressure cooker, the silence shattered by Clara's sharp intake of breath. She stood her chair, screeching, and pointed at the contract, her voice trembling with something I couldn't place. "You hid this from us, Abigail," she said, her words slicing through the murmurs. "You let us think you were struggling, scraping by. And all this time you were—" "What? Playing us?" Her accusation hit like a slap, twisting my triumph into something ugly. I opened my mouth to explain, to say I'd kept it secret to protect myself, but she didn't stop. "You've been lying to your own family," she said, louder now, her eyes flashing with hurt and rage. "How could you?" Aunt Margaret jumped in, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "This is outrageous," she said, clutching her napkin like a lifeline. "You've been collecting our rent, living off us while we thought you were barely getting by." Her words were venom, painting me as a schemer, a thief. My cousins whispered furiously, their glances sharp as knives, and I felt the room turn against me, my victory souring into a public trial. I wanted to scream that I'd earned every cent, that I'd poured my soul into that building, but my voice was trapped, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Ethan slammed the contract back on the table, his face red, his composure gone. "This is a stunt," he said, his voice booming. You expect us to believe you pulled this off? You with your little art gigs and no connections." He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Who helped you? Some shady investor? Or did you just forge this to make a scene?" The accusation was absurd, but it landed, fueling the room's doubt. "A cousin," Sophie piped up, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Yeah, how do we know it's real?" "Show us the bank statements, Abigail. Prove it." The demand was a gut punch, their disbelief stripping away the strength I'd clung to. My hands shook as I gripped the table's edge, my nails digging into the wood. I'd spent years proving myself to myself, but here in front of them, I was still the girl who didn't belong. Clara's voice cut through again, softer, but no less cruel. "I trusted you," she said, almost to herself. "I defended you, and you were laughing at us behind our backs." Her words broke something in me, the sister I'd once run to, now standing as my accuser. I looked to Uncle Harold, desperate for his quiet support. But even he averted his eyes, his silence a betrayal of its own. The room spun, their voices overlapping, a chorus of doubt and scorn. Aunt Margaret demanded an explanation, her tone implying I owed them one. Ethan muttered about legal action, his threats half-formed but menacing. Sophie crossed her arms, waiting for proof I couldn't produce on the spot. Clara just stared, her disappointment heavier than any insult. I felt stripped bare, my truth twisted into a lie they could wield against me. My chest ached, not just from their words, but from the realization that they'd never see me. Not really. I stood there, exposed, my secret, a weapon turned against me, and I didn't know how to fight back. The dining room's accusations clung to me like damp clothes as I left Aunt Margaret's house, the contract folder heavy in my bag. Clara's betrayal, Ethan's threats, and the family's disbelief churned in my mind. But I didn't cry. Not anymore. I walked to my car, the night air sharp against my skin, and drove to my apartment in silence, my hands steady on the wheel. By the time I stepped into my cramped living room, something new was stirring, a quiet resolve, like a fire catching dry wood. I wasn't going to let their words bury me. The next morning, I woke early, the dawn light filtering through my thin curtains. My desk was a mess of blueprints and sticky notes, remnants of my real estate dreams. I cleared a space and dialed Rachel, my lawyer, who'd helped me close the building deal. Her voice was calm, grounding when she answered. "We need to talk strategy," I said, my tone firm. "They know about the building and they're not happy." Rachel didn't miss a beat. "Come to my office," she said. "We'll figure out your next move." Her office was a small, tidy space downtown, with stacks of legal books and a coffee maker humming in the corner. Rachel sat across from me, her glasses perched on her nose as I laid out the family meeting disaster. "They think I tricked them," I said, my voice low. "Clara's acting like I betrayed her, and Ethan's hinting at lawsuits." Rachel leaned back, tapping a pen against her chin. "They're rattled because you outplayed them," she said. "But you own that building, Abigail. Legally, morally, it's yours. Let's show them what that means." We spent hours mapping out a plan. I'd start by formalizing the building's management, clear leases, transparent finances, to counter any claims of shady dealings. Rachel suggested a tenant meeting to build trust, which felt daunting, but right. "You're not just a landlord," she said. "You're a steward. Show them that." Her words lit something in me, a sense of purpose I'd almost forgotten. I left her office with a to-do list and a strange calm, like I was finally steering my own ship. That afternoon, I drove to the apartment building, a sturdy brick structure with ivy creeping up its walls. The courtyard was alive with tenants' kids kicking a soccer ball, an older man reading on a bench. I parked and walked through, my boots crunching on gravel, taking it in. This was mine, not just on paper, but in every crack and corner I'd studied before buying. A woman approached, her gray hair tied back, a basket of laundry in her arms. "You're the new owner, right?" she asked, her smile warm. I nodded, introducing myself. "I'm Edith," she said. "We've been wondering about you. Folks say you keep rents fair. That's rare." Her words caught me off guard, a balm after the family's venom. I thanked her, promising to stop by again, and headed to the manager's office. The space was cramped with a flickering fluorescent light, but I sat at the desk and opened my laptop. I drafted a letter to the tenants announcing a meeting to discuss the building's future. My fingers paused over the keys, Clara's accusation echoing. "You've been lying to your own family." I shook it off, focusing on the screen. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about the people here, the lives I could protect. As I typed, my phone buzzed with a voicemail from Clara. I hesitated, then played it, her voice tight. "Abigail, we need to talk. You can't just drop something like that and walk away. It's not fair." I set the phone down, my jaw tight. Fair. She'd stood by while they tore me apart. I wasn't ready to answer, not yet. Instead, I emailed the letter to the building manager, my heart racing with a mix of fear and conviction. I was done hiding. It was time to show them all what I was made of. I hit send on the tenant letter, the soft click of my laptop echoing in the dim manager's office. My heart thudded not with fear, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Clara's voicemail lingered in my mind, her demand for fairness a faint echo now. I wasn't ready to face her, but I was done letting her, or any of them, define me. I stood, stretching my arms, and stepped outside to the courtyard. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from a nearby planter. A group of tenants chatted on folding chairs, their laughter a stark contrast to the family meeting's venom. I watched them, strangers whose lives I was now part of, and felt a weight lift. This was bigger than their judgment. Back at my apartment, I spread out my blueprints, their edges curling from months of handling. I'd been sketching this building's potential since I first saw it listed, imagining renovations, green spaces, a community that felt like home. Now it wasn't just a dream, it was my responsibility. I grabbed a notebook and jotted down ideas for the tenant meeting, affordable maintenance plans, a suggestion box for improvements, maybe even a garden. My pen moved fast, each word a brick in the foundation I was building, not just for the property, but for myself. The next day, I met Maya at Brew and Bean, her shift just ending. She slid into the booth across from me, her eyes bright with curiosity. "So, you're really doing this," she said, nodding at the folder of tenant meeting notes I'd brought. I smiled, a real one, not the tight-lipped kind I'd worn at the family meeting. "I have to," I said. "They think I'm a fraud, but these people, the tenants, they deserve to know who I am." Maya leaned forward, her braids swinging. "You're not just proving them wrong," she said. "You're proving you right." Her words sank in a quiet truth that steadied me. She mentioned her brother, a real estate broker, had some contacts who could help with building upgrades. "I'll text him," she said, already typing on her phone. "You're not alone in this, Abigail." I thanked her, my throat tight, not used to this kind of support. As we talked, I noticed a flyer on the coffee shop bulletin board announcing a local business grant. My pulse quickened. The building could qualify funds for repairs, maybe even a community room. I snapped a photo, my mind racing with possibilities. It wasn't just about silencing Ethan or Clara. It was about building something lasting, something my father would have been proud of. Later that week, I walked the building's halls, knocking on doors to invite tenants to the meeting. Most were friendly, curious, their faces lighting up when I introduced myself. One man, a mechanic named Javier, shook my hand firmly. "You're the one keeping my rent steady," he said. "My kids thank you." His gratitude was a jolt grounding my purpose. But not everyone was warm. A young couple eyed me skeptically, asking pointed questions about future rent hikes. I answered honestly, promising transparency, but their doubt stung a faint echo of my family's accusations. I pushed it down, focusing on the bigger picture. That night, I drafted a letter to my family, my fingers steady on the keys. It wasn't an apology or a defense, it was an invitation. "I'm hosting a tenant meeting next week," I wrote. "You're welcome to come and see what I've built. I don't expect you to understand, but I'm done hiding." I addressed it to Clara, Ethan, Aunt Margaret, even Uncle Harold, and hit send before I could second-guess myself. My phone stayed silent. No replies, but I didn't care. I was moving forward with or without them. As I closed my laptop, I caught my reflection in the dark screen. My eyes tired, but alive. I walked to my window, the city lights sprawling below, and pressed my hand to the glass. It was cold, solid, like the truth I'd finally claimed. I didn't need their approval anymore. I stood there silent, my breath fogging the pain, and felt the strength I'd been building all along settle deep in my bones. The tenant meeting letter was out my invitation to the family sent, and I felt lighter, like I'd shed a skin I'd outgrown. A week later, I sat at Brew and Bean, the same corner booth, where Maya had slipped me that napkin months ago. The coffee shop was quiet, the morning rush gone, leaving just the hum of the espresso machine. I'd asked Clara and Uncle Harold to meet me here on neutral ground, away from Aunt Margaret's suffocating dining room. My hands wrapped around a warm mug, the ceramic grounding me as I waited, unsure if they'd even show. Clara arrived first, her coat buttoned tight, her face drawn. She slid into the booth without a word, her eyes avoiding mine. I'd braced for anger, but her silence was heavier, like she was carrying a wound I couldn't see. "Thanks for coming," I said, my voice soft, but steady. She nodded, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. "I didn't think you would," she said finally, her voice low. "After everything I thought you'd cut us off." Her words caught me off guard, not accusing, but raw, like she'd been wrestling with them for days. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "I didn't want to hurt you," I said. "I just needed to stop hiding who I am." Clara's eyes flicked up, and for the first time, I saw something like guilt in them. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "At the meeting, I didn't mean to turn on you. I was jealous, Abigail. You did something I never could." Her admission hung between us, fragile and sharp. I wanted to reach for her to bridge the gap, but years of rivalry held me back. Instead, I nodded, letting her words settle a small crack in the wall between us. Uncle Harold walked in his coat damp from a light drizzle outside. He sat beside Clara, his presence steady like an oak in a storm. I invited him because his quiet gaze at the meeting had felt like an anchor, the only thing keeping me from drowning. He set a small, worn journal on the table, his fingers brushing its leather cover. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "I should have spoken up when they came at you." His words were a surprise, a confession I hadn't expected. I stayed quiet, waiting, sensing he had more to say. He opened the journal, revealing pages of neat handwriting dates going back decades. "I was like you," once he said. "Had big plans, bought a warehouse nobody believed in. The family called me a fool, said I'd lose everything. I proved them wrong, but it cost me." He looked at me, his eyes heavy with memory. "You're stronger than I was, Abigail. You didn't wait for their permission." His story was a mirror, reflecting my own fight, and it stirred something deep of pride I hadn't fully claimed. Clara shifted her hands, still fidgeting. "What now?" she asked, her voice small. "Are you going to kick us out?" "Sell the building?" There was fear in her question, a crack in her usual confidence. I shook my head. my resolve firm. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I just want to do right by the tenants by this place." She looked away, her jaw tight, and I saw the struggle in her, a sister grappling with her own shame. Harold reached over, patting her hand a silent reassurance, but the air between us stayed thick, unresolved. My phone buzzed a new email from Ethan. I opened it, my stomach knotting. His message was curt. "Your little stunt doesn't change facts. We're tenants. We have rights. Expect pushback." No signature, just cold words, a reminder that not everyone was ready to bend. I set the phone down, my fingers cold, the weight of his threat settling in. Clara glanced at the screen, her expression unreadable, and Harold's eyes narrowed, but neither spoke. The coffee shop felt smaller, their silence louder than any argument, and I sat there, caught in the stillness of a battle I hadn't chosen. The coffee shop's warmth couldn't cut through the chill of Ethan's email, its words lingering like a bruise. Clara's eyes flicked away from my phone, her silence heavier than any apology. Harold folded his journal shut, his fingers slow, deliberate, as if sealing away his own past. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness sharp on my tongue, and waited for one of them to speak. But the moment stretched the clink of cups and murmur of other patrons filling the void. I'd laid myself bare, and now their quiet was a mirror reflecting the distance still between us. I broke the silence, my voice low but firm. "I'm holding the tenant meeting tomorrow," I said. "If you want to see what I'm doing, come." No pressure. Clara's lips parted, but she only nodded, her gaze fixed on the table. Harold gave a small grunt, his way of agreeing, but his eyes held a weight, like he was measuring me against his own battles. I stood gathering my things, the folder of tenant notes tucked under my arm. "I'll see you there," I said, and walked out, the bell above the door jingling softly behind me. The next day, I stood in the building's community room, a modest space with folding chairs and a chipped wooden table. Tenants trickled in their faces, a mix of curiosity and caution. Edith, the woman from the courtyard, brought a plate of homemade cookies, setting them down with a wink. "For morale," she said. I smiled, grateful, but my nerves hummed as I scanned the room for Clara or Harold. The clock ticked past the start time, and they didn't show. My chest tightened, not with surprise, but with a dull ache, the kind that comes when hope frays but doesn't break. I started the meeting, my voice steady, despite the empty chairs I'd saved for them. I explained my plans: fair rents, a repair fund, a community garden. The tenants listened, some nodding, others jotting notes. Javier, the mechanic, raised his hand. "You're not selling, right?" he asked, his brow creased. "My kids love it here." I met his gaze, my resolve hardening. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "This is my home too." The room softened their trust, a fragile gift, but it filled the space Clara and Harold had left empty. As the meeting ended, I stepped outside to the courtyard, needing air. The sky was overcast, a gray blanket over the city. My phone buzzed a text from Aunt Margaret, short and cold. "Heard about your meeting. People are talking. You're stirring trouble, Abigail." I stared at the screen, her words a needle sharp but predictable. She hadn't come, but her judgment reached me anyway, carried by gossip through the family grapevine. I pictured her at her polished table, spinning my actions into a story of betrayal, rallying cousins to her side. I slipped my phone into my pocket and leaned against the courtyard's brick wall, the rough texture grounding me. A kid ran past, chasing a stray soccer ball, his laughter bright against the gray day. I thought of Clara's apology, Harold's story, Ethan's threat, all of them pieces of a puzzle I couldn't force together. They'd seen my truth and turned away, their absence louder than any argument. My eyes stung, not with tears, but with the weight of standing alone. I closed them, letting the courtyard's sounds wash over me, and felt the quiet pull of everything I'd built, everything I still had to carry. The tenant meeting faded into the night, Aunt Margaret's text, a faint echo I refused to let linger. I woke the next morning in my apartment, the quiet wrapping around me like a soft blanket. Sunlight slipped through the blinds, casting stripes across my hardwood floor, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the urge to rush. I sat on my bed, a cup of tea steaming in my hands, and let my eyes wander to a small wooden box on my nightstand. It held my father's keepsakes, nothing valuable, just bits of him I'd saved. I hadn't opened it since the family meeting, but today felt different, like I was ready to face him again. I lifted the lid, the hinge creaking softly, and pulled out a folded piece of graph paper. It was a sketch we'd made together when I was 12, a clumsy blueprint for a treehouse we never built. His pencil marks were bold mine, shaky, but the memory was vivid. Us sprawled on the living room rug, laughing, as he described a rope ladder and a skylight for stargazing. "I don't care what they say," he'd told me, then his voice warm. "You've got a builder's heart, Abby." I traced the lines, my fingers steady, and felt a pang. Not grief, but gratitude. He'd seen me even when I couldn't see myself. I set the sketch aside and stood the floor cool under my bare feet. My apartment felt smaller today, not in a suffocating way, but like a cocoon I'd outgrown. I walked to the kitchen, grabbing a notepad, and started writing. Not a letter to my family or tenants, but to him. Dear Dad. I began the words flowing easily. I did it. I built something real like you always said I could. I wrote about the building, the tenants, the fight with Clara, letting the sentences spill without overthinking. It was a release, a way to honor him without the weight of their judgment. Later, I drove to the apartment building, the city waking up around me. The courtyard was empty, save for a stray cat napping on a bench, its fur dappled in the morning light. I wandered the grounds, noticing details I'd missed in my rush, a cracked flower pot someone had painted with bright swirls, a child's chalk drawing of a sun on the pavement. These were signs of life, of people making this place their own, and I felt a quiet pride in being part of it. I stopped by the mailbox, checking for maintenance requests, and found a handwritten note from Edith, the tenant, with the cookies. "Thank you for listening," it read. "You're making a difference." Her words settled in me, soft but heavy, like stones in a riverbed. I tucked the note in my pocket and kept walking, my steps slow, deliberate. The building's brick walls stood solid, weathered but strong, a reminder of what I'd created against all odds. I thought of Clara's absence at the meeting, Harold's unspoken regret, and even Ethan's cold email. They hadn't come, but I wasn't alone. These people, the tenants, Maya, even Rachel, were my circle, now built on trust, not blood. My heart felt full, not with triumph, but with a calm I hadn't known I could find. I paused by the courtyard's edge, the cat stirring to watch me with lazy eyes. The air was crisp, carrying the faint hum of traffic and birdsong. I closed my eyes, letting the sounds blend, and took a slow breath. This was mine, not just the building, but this moment, this peace. I wasn't running anymore. I was home. I left the courtyard, Edith's note a gentle weight in my pocket, and drove back to the city's edge where Brew and Bean waited like an old friend. The coffee shop was busier now, the midday crowd filling the air with chatter and the clatter of spoons. I spotted Maya behind the counter, her hands quick as she poured a latte and slid into a booth to wait for her break. My notebook lay open, but I didn't write. Instead, I watched the people around me, a student hunched over a textbook, a couple sharing a muffin, their fingers brushing. Ordinary moments, yet they felt profound, like I was seeing the world through a clearer lens. Maya joined me, her apron smudged with coffee grounds, and plopped down with a sigh. "Long day," she said, but her smile was warm. I told her about the tenant meeting Javier's questioned Edith's cookies. "You're building something special," she said, her voice earnest. "Not just a building, but a place people feel safe." I nodded, her words sinking deep, and shared my latest idea, applying for that business grant to fund a community room. Her eyes lit up. "That's you, Abigail," she said. "Always dreaming bigger." I laughed soft, realizing how far I'd come from the woman who hid her sketches in shame. We talked longer, her stories of late shifts and family weaving with mine. She mentioned a dream of her own, opening a bakery someday, nothing fancy, just a place for warm bread and good company. "You'll get there," I said, meaning it. "You've got the heart for it." She grinned, but her eyes held a flicker of doubt, the kind I knew too well. I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You've been my light, Maya," I said. "Let me be yours." Her smile softened, and for a moment we sat in comfortable silence, two women carrying their own quiet fights. I left the shop with the to-go cup, the warmth seeping through the paper, and walked to a nearby park. The grass was damp from morning dew, the benches empty under a canopy of oaks. I sat the wood cool against my legs and opened my notebook to a blank page. No plans or lists this time, just a single sentence, "I am enough." I wrote it slowly, the ink bold, and felt my shoulders loosen like I'd set down a load I'd carried too long. Clara's absence, Ethan's threats, Aunt Margaret's gossip, they were still there, but they didn't own me anymore. A breeze stirred, rustling the leaves, and I thought of my father not as a memory, but as a presence woven into who I'd become. I didn't need to prove myself to him. He'd always known. The park faded into the background, the distant hum of the city a soft lullaby. I closed my notebook and leaned back, my eyes tracing the branches above. Time slowed, each breath a choice to keep going, not for them, but for me. The world felt vast, and I was no longer small within it. I sat there, still letting the quiet hold me ready for whatever came next. A year passed, and the city had shifted with the seasons, its pulse steady under my feet. I stood in the community center I'd rented for the next family meeting, a plain brick building with wide windows and folding tables covered in white cloth. The air smelled of fresh paint and coffee brewing in the corner. I was 30 now, and the woman who'd trembled at Aunt Margaret's table felt like a distant memory. My hands were steady as I arranged chairs, each clack of metal, a small act of claiming this moment. The building, my building, hummed with life outside its tenants, now my extended family, their trust, a quiet strength I carried. Clara arrived early, her steps hesitant as she crossed the threshold. We'd been talking more, not like before, but better, small steps over coffee or quick calls about nothing important. She wore a simple sweater, her usual polish softened, and when she hugged me, it was brief but real. "We're hosting together," I said, handing her a stack of name tags. She smiled, a little nervous, and started writing names, her handwriting neat. "It's weird," she said, "being here like this." I nodded, not needing to say more. We were rebuilding, not erasing, and that was enough for now. The room filled slowly, cousins and aunts trickling in, their chatter quieter than last year's. Uncle Harold came too, his coat slung over his arm, and he gave me a nod that felt like a full conversation. I caught his eye, grateful for the journal he'd shared, the story that had steadied me. No Ethan, though. I'd heard he'd moved to a new condo project across town. His emails long since stopped. His absence was a relief, but it left a faint sting, a reminder of what couldn't be mended. I let it pass, focusing on the people who'd shown up. I stepped to the front, my voice clear as I welcomed everyone. I shared updates about the building, new lighting in the hallways, a mural painted by local kids, a grant I'd won for a community library. My cousins listened, some nodding, others glancing at each other unsure. Aunt Margaret sat near the back, her lips pursed, but she didn't interrupt. I didn't need her approval anymore, but I noticed her hands folded tight in her lap, no longer clutching her usual defenses. It was small, but it was something. After I walked them to the building, a short drive across the city. The courtyard was alive with tenants stringing fairy lights for a summer potluck, their laughter spilling into the evening. I pointed out the garden rows of herbs and flowers tended by volunteers and the new benches where people read or chatted. Clara stayed close, her eyes wide, taking it in. "This is yours," she said, almost a whisper. I nodded, my throat tight, not with pain, but with the weight of what I'd built. Harold lingered by the garden, his fingers brushing a rosemary sprig, and I saw a faint smile, the kind that carries years of unspoken pride. We returned to the community center, the family quieter now, their usual bravado muted. I didn't push them to talk, didn't need their praise. I'd spent so long craving their validation, but standing here, surrounded by the life I'd created, I felt full. The sun dipped low, painting the room gold, and I let out a slow breath, my shoulders soft. The past was behind me, not gone, but settled like dust in a room I no longer lived in. The community center glowed under the fading sunlight, my family's voices a soft hum, as they mingled, some still processing the building I'd shown them. I stood by a window, the glass cool against my palm, watching the horizon turn pink. Clara joined me, holding a cup of tea. Her presence easy now, like we'd found a new rhythm. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. I didn't see it before, but I do now. I met her eyes, seeing not just my sister, but a woman wrestling with her own shadows. "Thanks," I said, and meant it, the word a bridge we were both crossing. I stepped outside, needing a moment alone, and sat on a bench under a street lamp's soft glow. The night was warm, the city's pulse, a distant hum, and I let my thoughts drift. I'd spent years chasing approval, bending under their words, but the building, the tenants, this life, it was mine, carved from my own hands. I thought of Maya, her bakery dream, and Javier, his kids, playing in the courtyard. Their hopes were threads woven into my own, a tapestry stronger than any family name. The lesson came to me slowly, not in a flash, but like water wearing down stone. It wasn't about proving them wrong or even proving myself right. It was about choosing who I wanted to be every day, despite the noise. I'd learned to forgive not for them, but for me to free the space their judgment had taken. I forgave Clara's jealousy, Ethan's arrogance, Aunt Margaret's disdain, because holding on to anger was a weight I no longer needed. But I also forgave myself for the years I'd doubted, for the times I'd shrunk. That was the real victory, not the building, but the woman I'd become steady in her own skin. I pulled a small key from my pocket, one I'd found in my father's keepsake box, its brass worn smooth. I didn't know what it unlocked, but I held it, a quiet promise to keep building, not just structures, but a life rooted in purpose. The stars were out now, faint against the city's glow, and I tilted my head back, letting their light settle over me. I wasn't finished growing, but I was no longer afraid of the work. I was enough, and that was the truth I'd carry forward. What's a moment that made you realize your own strength? Share it in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If this resonated, please like and subscribe to join me on this journey. Share it with someone who needs a reminder of their own light. Thank you for listening, for being here. Here's to finding peace, one step at a time.